Fake news, propaganda, and questions about the credibility of information continue to cloud political and cultural developments that are shaping our world. Although fake news has always existed in one form or another, the current hype serves as a red herring that hides the deep political dysfunction in societies in the post-truth environment. My name is Shirvan and welcome to Caspian Report. The primary function of the mainstream media is not to serve or inform the public, nor does the media function as a checks and balances on political power. These are merely secondary side effects if the quality of the content is sufficient. The primary goal, however, is less glamorous. Most mainstream media firms are big corporations. Some are even part of larger conglomerates, and as is the case in any kind of business, their objective is to maximize revenues. Therefore, investigative journalism takes second place to the financial needs of the corporation. This attitude holds true for the traditional media as well as the new digital media. Since 2004, the number of printed newspapers and professional reporters has steadily decreased, while the sheer amount of noise on the internet and web-generated news has surged. As advances in technologies converged in the media, more people turned into producers, distributors, and editors of news outlets than ever before. This shift in the distribution of news is due to the changes in advertising. In the last 2 decades, more effective mechanisms were designed that matched commercial messages to consumers, until finally, with the advent of the internet, word-of-mouth advertising was digitalized thanks to sophisticated algorithms. Personalized advertising has many benefits. For one, the customer is not subjected to abstract messages that are designed for large demographic audiences. Instead, the algorithm remembers the past experience of the user, and based upon that, it suggests things that the user may want to know in the future. For instance, Amazon guides its clients to products that they may enjoy next based on what they purchased recently. This powerful impact of personalized commercial messages is what makes platforms like Google and Facebook so enticing for advertisers. However, what is good for the marketplace and for consumers does not hold the same benefits for the traditional media and the distribution of information. Less advertising has resulted in less revenues, which has led to cutbacks in resources. Moreover, the algorithms that personalize advertising and narrow down choices are also responsible for the personalization of news feeds. Currently, about 60% of Americans get their news from social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter, which offer a nearly endless stream of stories and items. The primary purpose of the algorithms that spread the news is to keep the user scrolling for as long as possible. And since people tend to read and share information that supports their pre-existing beliefs, most algorithms are based on the reinforcement theory. This is also why Google reveals different search results to people with conflicting political ideas. And the same is true for Amazon, which recommends different kinds of books for liberal and conservative camps. So, in a twist of irony, the tools of mass communication are so refined that they function as personalized means of transmission. However, news that is spread by reinforcement-based algorithms is not necessarily accurate. Most web-generated news distributors have no incentives to remain impartial or present the truth, since their business plans are based on the number of clicks or views. Perhaps the best statement that captures the impact of this is the adage, "On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog." Plus, reinforced news also facilitates a filtered awareness and promotes a clickbait culture. People who share ideas and interests are coiled tightly together, while vital but unpleasant issues are neglected. This system basically tells readers what they want to know, not what they need to know. Some societies are more affected than others, but overall, the personalized news feeds contribute to the polarization of the cultural and political landscape. Meanwhile, the number of people who consume genuine, impartial information remains fairly limited. The exposure of reinforced news is so effective that it outperforms the mainstream press in finances and manpower. In this framework, reinforcement-based algorithm news has brought yellow journalism to the forefront, which is fixed to the demise of the mainstream media. So, in the words of Mark Twain, history may not repeat itself, but it often rhymes. The unfortunate truth is that personalized advertising and news is returning the media to the circulation of information during the partisan era. Yet, unlike the past, personalized content is more refined. Perhaps the pinnacle moment of modern fake news occurred during the American elections of 2016, when the Internet Research Agency, which is a Russian troll farm based in St. Petersburg, created about 120 false pages in Facebook and posted more than 80,000 messages that reached about 29 million Americans. The exposure surged to 150 million Americans after the posts were shared and liked. Whether the Russian exploitation of the social media algorithms had a decisive impact on the election results is yet to be researched. But similar Russian activities have targeted Europe, where the Kremlin seeks to bolster the digital presence of populist and nationalist movements. In the past, non-Russian sympathizers who were susceptible to Russian propaganda were dubbed as useful idiots, a term devised by Vladimir Lenin. At the time, the useful idiots were not communists, but they were so firmly convinced that the West was decadent that they were prepared to join whatever opposition was available. Today, a similar trend of useful idiots is unfolding on social media platforms, where Europeans and Americans who disagree with their respective authorities are being indirectly exploited by the Kremlin. For instance, the Russian Internet Research Agency exploits the reinforced algorithms to accelerate the spread of fake news and thereby undermines the geopolitical foes of Moscow. In the realm of fake news and information rivalry, the Russians hold one fundamental advantage over the West, which is that the English language is far more widespread than Russian, so American retaliation capabilities are somewhat limited by the language barrier. From the Russian point of view, the interference in the American cultural and political landscape is not surprising. Since the 1990s, Washington has used non-governmental organizations to shape Russian domestic politics. So for Putin's government, the current cyber efforts are payback, and it can be viewed as a cyber version of the divide and conquer strategy that falls within the rivalry between Moscow and Washington. But it's not just Russia that has troll factories. Jihadist groups are also disproportionately present on social media platforms. And most authoritarian governments have their own state-controlled versions of Facebook where they monitor civil obedience. Meanwhile, in democratic nations, governments, corporations, and institutions use experts, interviews, data, and other scoops to make themselves crucial to the process of investigative journalism. The point is that every country, organization, or entity has its own measures to manipulate the media. However, what makes the future of fake news truly terrifying are the latest innovations in facial and vocal programs. Software like Lyrebird and Adobe Voco can forge a vocal library by recording an example of someone's voice. Other operating systems touch on the realm of facial motion capture, such as Face-to-Face, which uses algorithms to digitally superimpose faces onto other bodies. The combination of these facial and vocal innovations grants endless possibilities for mainstream films. Think of Peter Cushing and Carrie Fisher in the recent Star Wars installments. However, such software also presents a set of tools for malevolent purposes. Hackers could use these programs to launch sophisticated phishing attacks. For instance, scammers could leave a convincing instruction by voicemail, ordering an employee to open an important email attachment, which would then insert a Trojan horse into the network. Or the scammer could simply instruct the employee to wire funds to a confidential business account. The criminal exploitation of facial and vocal programs is unsettling, but perhaps the biggest potential for these tools lies in the field of the media. False information is readily distributed on the internet, but the facial and vocal programs could revolutionize the distribution of fake news. Even if the final product has flaws, a significant segment of the public will still believe it to be authentic. Due to these advances in video, audio, and artificial intelligence, in the nearby future, web-generated fake news will be so realistic that we will no longer be able to rely on our senses. Even the mainstream media will be unable to tell the difference between authentic and false footages. In the 17th century, French philosopher René Descartes wrote about the perception of the truth and how human senses can sometimes be deceptive. He gave an example of a stick halfway immersed in water. From a certain angle, it appears bent, but if one withdraws the stick, it would appear straight, which shows that the initial belief was false. Although such optical illusions are easy to recognize, modern programs are pushing the human perception to new boundaries in which we increasingly cannot rely on our senses to reveal the truth. In this context, the internet is changing from a unifying force for social solidarity to a space of reinforcement-based clusters. The tech companies, like the partisan newspapers in the past, reject responsibility for the content they publish and promote. When Facebook was criticized for the role it played in the transmission of false news stories during the United States presidential elections, Mark Zuckerberg posted a statement in which he denied accountability and said that the goal of Facebook is to give every person a voice. Eventually, the surge in fake news will force people to be more skeptical and rational, but the impact of the new emerging technologies makes the future seem uncertain. That being said, computer scientist Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the World Wide Web, expressed a more optimistic view on the future of the internet when he stated that the project is by no means finished, and that it's still possible to create media platforms that show us what we don't know, rather than reflecting of what we want to know. Nevertheless, fake news is going to get far worse before it gets any better. This was a Caspian report by me, Shirvan. Special recognition goes to our contributors on Patreon for giving us the resources to produce content like this. Now, advertising on YouTube is not exactly a feasible policy, so if you want to help Caspian Report to remain independent of sponsors, you can join our crowdfunding platform on patreon.com/CaspianReport and choose a pledge that fits within your means. Whatever you decide to contribute, the effort is greatly appreciated as all the funds help to sustain the channel. In any case, thank you for your time and Sarol.